Jerry, thank you so much for that song. Appreciated it. And Brother Adam, if you're in here, if you're waiting for Brother Greg to come up and sing, you're going to be looking at an empty stage for quite a long time. I'm like Brother Wally over here. I don't do it, and there's a reason for that, so you're welcome. I do want to take this opportunity tonight. First of all, we are at the last session of this year's split summer sessions, the men and the women dividing out. We first did this a couple of years ago. And I want to take the moment to thank Brother Wally for doing this. I know when we started this 2 years ago, people thought this was a very different idea. They thought it was a unique idea. Some thought it was an unusual idea. But I will say that not only then as well as this year, the handful of feedbacks that I've heard from people of both men and women, both genders, has been 100% positive. I think that we have been able to get a lot out of just focusing on some things that are a little bit more male-centric. I know that the ladies, I'm getting good reports from Heather on that. And if you've been around Baptist churches long enough, you know that if you step out as a pastor and try to do something a little different or unusual, you open yourself up to some criticisms, unfortunately. Fortunately for us, God has blessed us. I am not aware of any of those types of situations, but it's been great that Brother Wally has been willing to take those opportunities, take those chances. And I do want to thank all of the men that have been teaching this series this summer. Had 6 other gentlemen teaching this summer. Very broad range, diversity in terms of age groups, in terms of backgrounds, spiritual experiences, personal experiences. And I've appreciated hearing from every single one of them. Hopefully you guys have as well. I know that most of the topics, or maybe most, but many of the topics that we have talked about so far, typical things that we would expect when a bunch of guys get together and talk. The topics so far, we've talked about standing, we've talked about fighting, we've talked about protecting, we've talked about being strong. We've talked about all those things that we tend to think about when we think about being guys. Tonight, we're actually going to shift gears a little bit. And the more I've kind of gotten to think about this, the more I think maybe, by the way, I'll go ahead and say it. Nobody else I don't think will say it. I think I'm the oldest guy that's actually teaching in this series. Maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know. Maybe I'm the old timer. But I'm teaching on a topic tonight that I'll be truthful with you. At 54 years old and having been saved 34 years, I'm actually just now getting to the point in my life where I am grasping and understanding the topic that we are going to talk about tonight. Tonight we are going to be focusing on the complete opposite of what most of our lessons have been focusing on so far. We're going to talk about not taking action. And instead of not doing, we choose to try to communicate. I'll be honest with you. Even with my given profession, on a personal level, communication, not my strong suit. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. I'm going to lay out the timeline so you all understand and get this context. So August of 2018 is when I left my last pastorate. We started visiting here. I say visiting here, that's a little bit misleading because Jerry and his family have been going here probably 14, 15 years, I don't know exactly, but they're not original, first, but they're pretty close. So we visited many times back at the old Union Hall and got to know Brother Wally and Joe and a lot of the older time type of people. And so we weren't complete strangers. December of 2018, we joined the church. We've been here since. Amen. April of 2018, so please remember, 4 full months before we started coming here. My son Nathan was a senior at Fairfield High School. My daughter was a freshman. They were both in the marching band. Once every 4 years, because they assume if you do marching band all 4 years, you'll get the opportunity to do this once. The Fairfield marching band goes to Disney World. April. Weather's nice, so forth. One of the days that you're down at Disney, the marching band gets to march in one of those parades they have during the middle of the day. Full uniform, behind Mickey, in front of Dumbo. You don't want it the other way around. You don't ever want to follow Dumbo. You guys can figure out why later. It's an elephant joke. You guys will get it. Anyway, So a very exciting time, something very special. But if any of you have ever been to Disney World, here's one thing you know. Whoever said Disney World was the happiest place on earth has never been. If you've ever been to Disney World, that tells me that you have kids. Probably, because why else is, a full-grown man going to Disney World? You go to Disney World, and if you have kids, you're usually going in the summertime. July, August, all the other times I'd been before, it was in one of those 2 months. And you can be in 95-degree weather 1 minute, and literally 5 minutes later, you're running for your life in a hurricane. So the weather usually, if you're going in the summertime, is horrible. It's an expensive proposition. You have to deal with lines. You have to, because again, you're taking children. Doesn't matter if they're 3 or 13, you're always going to deal with some issues involving your children at Disney World. And the main reason why I hate going to Disney World, somebody shouted out. The people, the crowds. Disney World, the happiest place on earth, can take what is otherwise a relatively, from a human perspective, normal human being who is raised with some common sense, some background of being raised to be polite and considerate and so forth, and turn them into absolute jerks. April 2018, we're down at Disney World. Kids are off doing their thing. Heather and I are in one of those little eating things. You go in, and of course, when you go and eat in one of them things, this is before COVID, of course, so the lines are jam-packed, and you're literally standing on top of each other. There is no personal space in that situation. The guy in front of us decided, for whatever reason in that environment, it was a good idea to wear a backpack. And he kept swinging as he was turning, not intentionally doing anything, but he kept hitting Heather with the backpack. Now, I tried to keep my Christianity for a few moments, but there comes a certain point where it's like, excuse me, would you please quit hitting my wife with your backpack? Presumably fairly normal people in the crowd. If you're the guy wearing the backpack, somebody taps you on the shoulder, hey, would you please quit doing X, Y, and Z? What do you think or hopefully you think you would do in this situation? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was doing it. I'll quit doing it. I'll take the backpack down. I'll shift, whatever. My apologies, I didn't mean to hit your wife. Well, no, because we are in Disney World, this otherwise what I presume to be normal human being became a jerk, which in turn caused me to become a jerk. And unfortunately, the situation got so escalated, it did not come to physical blows, but it came real close because you had a wife on each side trying to keep us apart. It was like the more I kept trying to explain the problem to this guy, the more he wanted to explain to me that he had a right to wear a backpack. You have the right to wear a backpack. You do not have the right to hit my wife with it. So it almost came to blows, and I mean that literally. I was as mad as probably one of the few times I've ever been that mad at another human being. Why did I turn that way? For those of you in the crowd who are whispering to yourself, because you're a jerk, yeah, there may be some truth to that. But I'm hoping that the real answer lies in the fact that I'm a guy, and when I see a problem, I want to fix it. I want to take action, and especially if I feel like you are either injuring or insulting my family, and especially my wife, I'm going to do something about it. That's right. Now, here's the problem. Had it not been for God intervening through my wife, because I was not listening to God, I wasn't asking God's opinion, wasn't thinking about God, I don't know what would have happened in the fight. He wasn't some big biker dude. He wasn't some little old man. He was pretty much like me. He was just an average size. He might have been in his 40s, whatever. I was 48, so he may have been 8 to 10 years younger. I don't know if I would have won the fight, lost the fight, whatever. Doesn't really matter. You come out of that situation, and for a day or two max, you might feel good about yourself because you stood up for your wife. But then what happens? After a certain point, God gets a hold of you. And God forces you to ask the following question. Is that what you should have done in that situation? And then, of course, the answer is no. Could I have handled that better? Absolutely, I could have. Turn your Bibles with me to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 24. We're going to look at a man, King David, before he's king, who is placed in a situation where he could have taken action, but he chose not to. Instead, he chose to talk something out. And by doing so, we're going to look at the three things that he accomplished. While you're turning there, let's get an idea of the context here. By the time you get to 1 Samuel 24, David has already fought and defeated Goliath. He has become a national hero with the rest of his exploits, fighting for the Israelites. Chapter 18, as a matter of fact, you don't have to turn there, but in chapter 18, tells us how the women were singing praises to his name. You remember what they sung? Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Saul was the king of Israel. I don't know about your experience. My experience is that anytime you meet and get to know somebody with any measure of power whatsoever, or you meet somebody that thinks they have a measure of power, there's probably an ego attached to it somewhere. Saul was not lacking in ego. He was the man who was personally picked by God to be the first king of Israel after Israel rejected God and said, "We want a king to rule over us like all the other nations." Saul was a rugged man. Saul was a tough guy. Saul was a famous warrior. And yes, Saul probably liked the idea of the ladies singing praises to him. What he didn't like was them singing more praises to David. So that part of chapter 18, it's more towards the beginning. We see where they're singing these praises. The spirit of jealousy starts building up in Saul. Jealousy leads to bitterness. Bitterness leads to hatred, which ultimately leads, by the time you get to the end of chapter 18, it says that Saul was scared of David because he saw the writing on the wall. He knew that David was going to replace him as the king of Israel. What Saul didn't realize is that you can never frustrate the will of God. So he decides, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to take care of it, I'm going to take action because I'm a man's man, I'm going to kill David. So David by this point is on the run. He's not alone. Again, don't turn here, but just so you have a reference, the first couple of verses of chapter 22 tells us the following. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam. And when his brethren and all of his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And every one that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So by the time we get to chapter 24, David's not alone. He's got his own little small army. 400 men are following him. We see from the description in chapter 22, these are not necessarily the men that you want marching by your side. Nobody here is listed as a great warrior. Nobody listed here is someone that's renowned of bravery. They're all with David because, whether because of their own sin or some other circumstance, they all have problems in their lives that are so severe, they would rather be with David, who is being chased for death by the king of Israel, as opposed to repenting, turning to God, and straightening their own lives out. So that's the crew that David has with him. Verse 1 of chapter 24. It says, "And it came to pass, when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheepcotes by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet. And David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. And the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him because he had cut off Saul's skirt. And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David stayed his servants with these words, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way. Now that's where we're going to stop reading the story. What happens after this, Saul gets up, he leaves the cave, David yells after him, lets him know that he was there, basically tells him, yeah, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Saul has a temporary repentance here, and everything, for at least now, is fine. And I say temporarily and now and so forth because just 2 chapters later, you're going to see the same scene repeat. But at least in the moment, David decided not to take action against Saul. He decided to talk it out. And by doing so, here's what we're going to notice. First of all, by doing this, and by the way, just a little side comment here, because I want you to just keep in mind the whole of the context. David and his men are already hiding in this cave. Saul is so consumed in his own hatred that he finds time in his busy schedule to fight the Philistines and then resumes his main purpose in trying to track down and kill David. So he takes care of the Philistines, and now we're back on the hunt. We take 3,000 of our men. He goes and he hides, well, Saul's not hiding. He's going to go to sleep in this cave. I don't know if it's the same Secret Service detail that was working Pennsylvania. Somehow the king of Israel goes into this cave where 400 of his enemies are sitting there for the taking. I don't know how that happens. All I know is that's what's going on. 400 men. Saul falls asleep. Not one mention of one guard, nothing. Verse 4, the men say unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. 400 of David's men were with him. They saw David as the leader. David and this band of men are running away, they're hiding, and now is David's opportunity to get the enemy before the enemy gets him. He would have been justified in doing this. If any of us that are in this situation and you know somebody is this serious about taking your life and you get the drop on them, probably every person in this room is going to kill them before they can kill you. Legally, you would be justified. Morally, I would argue you would still be justified. You are defending yourself. You are protecting your life. David, first of all, demonstrated a lot of humility by not doing this. Amen. You have 400 men that are standing there. Come on, David, you've got him. You can do this. You can do this. Do you understand how much humility it actually takes to look those men in the eyes and say, I'm not going to do it? Pride is the thing that got all of this situation started in the first place. It was Saul's pride that started all of this. David could have had pride. I don't want to look weak in front of my men. I'm a man. I'm expected to take action. If I don't do this, what are they going to think of me? But 1 Peter 5:5, remember what it tells us? It tells us that God resisteth the proud and he always gives grace to the humble. Amen. David didn't do what his pride would have stoked him to do. At a very minimum, even if you're not taking your own life into account, I got these guys back here looking at me. I got to do something. I got to show them that I'm strong, that they've made the right decision in following me. Not one time in this story does David ever stop, at least it's not recorded here, that he ever stops and hesitates and has any question, am I going to look weak in doing this? You know, guys, sometimes it's okay to not do stuff, Amen. To think it out, to talk about it, to try to talk out the problem. You might get criticized by people. You're going to get criticized for doing the right thing. It doesn't matter what you do. Your pride is going to tempt you into saying, I got to take action. I can't let that stand. David didn't listen to that. He humbled himself enough to say, I'm not going to do it. But the second thing that he demonstrates is he demonstrates, more importantly, a respect for God and God's will. When you look at what David says to his men, verse 6, he said unto his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. David did not do this, or David didn't refuse to do this, because of anything involving Saul. Saul was by this time an evil man who was seeking to take the life of a righteous man unrighteously, unjustly, for no purpose. Nowhere in that verse does David indicate it, other than he refers to him as my master. Nowhere does he indicate that he is sparing Saul's life because of anything redeeming about Saul or about their relationship. By this point, David was very close to Saul's son Jonathan. He doesn't even mention Jonathan as a consideration. Because of my best friend Jonathan, I'm not going to kill him. Doesn't say that. He says, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. You know, going back to my stupid little example about me almost getting into a fist fight in Disney World, I want you to remember what Brother Gibbs said this past Sunday morning. Let's see how many of you remember it. Hopefully all of you. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, what is our one job? To represent Jesus. Amen. If I had gotten into a fist fight, especially over something so stupid in Disney World, how would that have represented Jesus? Might have made me feel good for a moment. Might have made me feel like I defended my woman. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't have brought any glory to God. That's right. Sometimes when you choose not to act, you're bringing more glory to God than you could otherwise. Amen. You have to stop and think, are my actions going to demonstrate a respect for God and God's will? You know, it's the classic example, and you know, one of the things I hate about this time of the year, every 4 years, what's happening every 4 years? Presidential elections, right? There's going to be a lot of things said about both candidates. Just like every day, there's a lot of things said about the president. Doesn't matter who the president is. A lot of those things are being said by Christian people. Even though Romans 13:1 tells us, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Now, they may be ordained for good, and they may be ordained for not so good. There's always a purpose, there's always a plan, there's always a will. David had so much respect for God's will and the fact that Saul was God's anointed. He said, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. This man's trying to kill me. I'm not going to take his life. How really should we be acting when it comes to politics? Rhetorical question. You all can go home and think about that for yourself. You all can go home and think whether or not your actions demonstrate a reverence and a respect for God and God's will. I don't always like the people in charge. Matter of fact, you know what? I rarely like the people in charge. And again, I don't care what party they are. I'm not a big fan of the judges above me. No one specific in case one of them's watching. Individually, they're all great guys and women and whatever, but I don't always agree with every decision. But you know what? I have to respect the authority. God has placed those authorities above me. And David said, because God has anointed Saul, he is the king of God's people, I'm going to respect that. Can you imagine how much more powerful of a witness we would have, not only as Christians, but since this is the topic of the day, as men, male Christians, if we reined in the testosterone once in a while and yielded ourselves more to respecting God's will, you imagine how much more powerful we could be? Final thing that we see David demonstrating here, he's demonstrating faith. Now, we didn't read verses 12 or 15. Remember, I just kind of gave you the little snapshot of how this ends. David decides to tell Saul, here I am, et cetera, et cetera. But two of the things, and it's really the same thing repeated. Most important thing that he says to Saul, first in verse 12. The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. And then verse 15. The Lord therefore be judge and judge between me and thee, and see and plead my cause, and deliver me out of thine hand. Could David have killed Saul and it had been justified? Yes. Could David have killed Saul and legally claimed self-defense? Yes. If David had went ahead and done that, would God have fulfilled his promise to make David king? I don't know the answer because it didn't happen that way. God's always faithful to his promises. However, if David had done that, demonstrating a lack of faith in God's ability to protect him, I don't know how all that plays out. But we never get to that point because in these two verses, this great man of faith says, whatever the truth is, God knows. Amen. He'll judge between me, he'll judge between us, he'll judge between you, and God will sort it all out the way it's supposed to. You don't always have to take action to get the right result. Matter of fact, I'll tell you, a lot of times, the more I act, the more action I take, the worse I make things. There's a reason why the psalmist, who's believed in Psalm 46 to be the sons of Korah, to my understanding, one of the reasons why they wrote Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God, that psalm specifically is reminding us there are times when we shouldn't act. Amen. There are times when it is better to have a conversation. I understand we're the men of the households. I'm not going to do the sound effect. I told myself I wasn't going to do the sound effect. Those of you old enough to remember Home Improvement, Tim Allen, you know the noise he made. We really love to live in that sometimes, especially when it comes to the whole head of the household deal. And yeah, we are the heads of the household. We have responsibilities. We have duties. Doesn't mean, though, that you just get to boss the wife around. You have to talk things out. And if you're in God's will, and she's in God's will, and you're talking things out, and you're praying together, do you want to guess what's ultimately the result's going to be? Probably God's will. As opposed to, I'm a guy, I'm headstrong, I'm stupid, I'm impatient, so I'm just going to jump to action. Anybody in this room ever done that and oops, man, I really wish I hadn't? Happens all the time. David lays out these principles for us, demonstrating that, guys, it's okay sometimes to just back off, think things through, talk it through. God's going to work it out. Amen. You know, that's one of the things. Okay, so now we've got a whole late change in the ball game. Kamala Harris is going to be the presidential candidate for the Democrats. We didn't see that coming literally 3 weeks ago. And this running mate, the vice president, the guy from Minnesota, don't know anything about him, don't care about him. Quite frankly, do you want to know something? As we have seen over the course of human history, whoever is the president has less impact on our country and our world than the character of the Christians that we have in that time period. Amen. If you really want to get rid of abortion, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. Amen. Ultimately, it doesn't really even matter who's on the Supreme Court. It's how many people can we lead to Christ and watch the power of Christ convict them to do the right things. That's the real answer. That's the real issue. We don't have to sit around worrying that the sky is going to fall in on our heads. It's okay to just not do and let God do his thing.
Amen.
Pastor.